Do you actually need a real estate agent to buy a house?
Hey, make sure you check us out at the realestateandchillpodcast.com. Buy your real estate merch now. Real estate merch with swag. A brand for hustlers only. Let's go!
Welcome back to the newest episode of the Real Estate and Chill Podcast. I'm your host, James Chattery, here for all your residential financial needs, here with
Kevin Iglesias, Associate Real Estate Broker. Any real estate related questions, we are here to help.
Yes.
Let's dive into it, right?
All right, so hot topic today, and I'm going to air it out, right? Do you actually need a real estate agent to buy a house?
You're saying I'm not useful?
I mean, explain to me how you are.
Are you saying I'm useless?
Explain to me how you're not.
Well, let me ask you this. Would you personally buy a home without a real estate agent?
No.
Why not?
Listen, convince me. We're convincing the audience. Why are you valuable?
All right, so look, a lot of people think that it's super easy to purchase a home, but they don't understand the entire process, right? First of all, before you even start thinking about buying a house, there's people who are saving up for years, right? And the first step is always to budget, right? Like, all right, I can afford $2,500 a month, right? And then after expenses, after, everything's basically paid off and you want to live comfortably, you don't want to be house broke. The first thing I would tell you, the first thing you should do, whether you have a realtor or you don't, is to speak to a mortgage professional like yourself.
Yes, I am useful. You need me.
Speak to somebody like...
Unless you're cash.
Speak to somebody like you, right? Who has the expertise, the knowledge, and the proper guidance to help them. That's the first step. Once you have that pre-approval and you're not using an agent, a couple of things could happen, right? And I've seen this happen where the buyer goes directly to the listing agent, and which you have to understand, the listing agent doesn't work for you.
That's the biggest mistake that I always see.
The listing agent does not work for you. You did not hire the listing agent, right? I mean, there's a dual agency, which basically you represent both parties, but initially that agent was hired by the seller.
Right.
So all the fiduciary duties, the old cars, what they call it, is owed to the seller, right? So when you come in as a buyer and say, hey, look, I want to buy the property through you, it becomes so much more complicated, right? And the reason why people do it, and I've seen it happen a lot during COVID, is because they didn't want to miss out on the property.
Right.
So it's better to have representation than to have no representation whatsoever.
No taxation without representation.
All right, Uncle Sam. But it's better to have somebody who's going to properly guide you, because I've seen situations where they've gone directly to a listing agent, and I don't do this, by the way. I had situations, transactions where it was both sides.
Yeah. Where
they purchased a home and then they realized that there's so many defects. Why? Because maybe the listing agent said...
Well, you're not talking about your own.
No. I'm saying
you're just saying in general.
In general. I'm saying sometimes I've seen where the listing agent says don't do a home inspection. But that's not benefiting you as the buyer. Whether it's a new construction home, whether you think the home is perfect, I always recommend. I mean, I've done a home inspection for my own purchases, to always do a home inspection. Now, if you have somebody telling you don't do a home inspection, think about it. You're going to be paying $500-$600 to see on a home inspection. That $500 or $600 could save you $15,000, $16,000, $20,000 down the line. You as the buyer that's coming in that knows absolutely nothing about real estate, let's just say, doesn't know that the roof is going to cost you $15,000 to get fixed, doesn't know that there's a leak in the bathroom, right? Doesn't know there could be so many defects that you're just like being misguided just because you want the house. That's going to cost you a lot of money in the long run. Right. So yes, you can buy a house by yourself. Yes, you don't have to use a realtor, but you should.
So let me ask you this. Do you have to pay for a realtor out of pocket?
Up front? No. There's no upfront fee. I've never met with somebody and said, all right, you want to use me? My fee is $50,000. And they're like,
can you actually do that?
I mean, some brokerages, if you own your own brokerage, you pretty much can do an upfront fee, but I've never seen it happen. I mean, it's not common. I've had people come to me like, oh, I was working with another agent and he said that I had to pay him up front. And I was like, nothing gets paid out until closing. The seller doesn't get paid till closing. The listing agent doesn't get paid till closing. The buyer's agent doesn't get paid till closing. You don't get paid till closing. Pretty much their attorneys don't get paid at closing unless they have an upfront fee and then half later, whatever the case may be. But no money gets basically transferred into the closing table.
Okay. So, but do they pay you or do they not pay you? Do the buyers directly pay you?
So, all right. So this is an interesting topic, which people will get a little bit confused. When I'm listing a property, my commission, total commission, is negotiated between me and the seller, right? But in that commission, in that percentage, a certain percentage is paid out to the buyer's agent, if there is a buyer's agent. But there's no commission paid unless we have a buyer. So regardless if I told the seller, hey, look, my commission is 10%, let's just say, that 10% doesn't mean anything if the property is not sold. We need a buyer to come in order to make the deal happen.
Right.
So technically, it's negotiated between the seller and the listing agent, but it's only paid at the time where there's a buyer involved and we're at the closing table.
Right.
So they're not paying anything up front, but the buyer is paying the commission.
Because they're paying the commission through
the transaction, the proceeds of the sale.
But they're not paying you directly.
Not directly, no.
So they could use an agent. So if you use an agent and you don't use an agent,
you're still paying
the same thing.
Exactly.
So it doesn't cost you more money to use Kevin Iglesias.
Well, I'm going to hit the brakes right there because there are agents. I mean, look, we're providing you a service, right? So if I'm providing you a service, there are agents. You can ask more money for what you provide for your services.
Hey, make sure you check us out at the realestateandchillpodcast.com. Buy your real estate merch now. Real estate merch with swag. A brand for hustlers only. Let's go.
So let's just say it's a certain percentage to represent a buyer, right? You can ask for a point or two more if you feel like your services are worth that.
Gotcha,
That makes sense?
But does it all have to be straightened out in the beginning?
Of course.
It's like you can't say like later on, like,
no, you don't want to get, I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I've seen it happen where the buyer was like, I had no idea that I was paying for this, which I think is a little shady because when I sit down with somebody and have a consultation with them, I look, laying everything out, all my cards on the table. All right. I'll give you a scenario. Like the boroughs are really, really cutthroat. Usually the buyer payout on a buyer agency payout over there, it's like pennies, little to nothing. So either you have a couple options. You have to negotiate your commission and try to get it from the listing agent to convince the seller to pay you a little bit more. If they decline that, you're going to have to put your commission on top of their offer. So let's just say somebody's buying a co-op for $150,000, right? And they're only paying you
0.5%.
Let's just say, right? You can negotiate for them to pay you 1.5 on top of that.
But they'd have to give you the difference.
You could put it on top of the offer. If they decline that, if the first plan didn't work, you try to get it from the seller and the listing agent, that didn't work, you could put it on top of the offer and they're like, no, we don't like that for whatever reason. I've seen that happen. That doesn't work. Then you're going to have to go to your buyer like, hey, look, we have a contract, a buyer agency contract. On this contract, and this should be discussed from the beginning.
Yeah.
On this contract, it states that this is what my services cost.
Right. Okay.
Unfortunately, on this property, they're only willing to pay out X amount. So that means that this would have to be covered by you.
Gotcha.
So that's the only time where, yes, as a buyer, you would have to come out of pocket. Now, look, because people always try to negotiate commissions, right? But why would you want to do that if somebody's handling one of your biggest assets, right or wrong?
Of course.
If you have a crappy agent that's going to be paid an X amount of percentage,
right,
and you have an agent who's going above and beyond for you, who's asking basically for the same percentage or a little bit more, why wouldn't you do it unless, obviously, if you can't afford it?
Right.
But it's a service. I don't go to a steakhouse, a 5-star steakhouse, looking for a Big Mac or something on the dollar menu. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're providing you a service. They're providing you with something that has quality, right? That you're willing to pay a little bit more for.
Right.
Right or wrong?
That makes sense.
So, I mean, you can not use a realtor. You're still going to be paying the same amount regardless.
Yeah.
In commissions.
So I think as we wrap this up, let's review what we talked about, just so nobody's confused with anything. So
yes,
it depends.
You can not use a realtor to purchase a property, but regardless, if you're not using somebody for yourself, you're still going to be using the listing agent, right?
Right. So a realtor's still involved unless it's
100%.
Yeah,
like
unless
you know
it's like
what?
a for sale by owner or something like that.
Right, but that's
Then
one
those
of
deals get. Yeah.
even when you're for sale by owner, like, oh, I don't want to pay a agent a commission. If you're buying a property, doesn't matter where, unless you're buying another for sale by owner, you're still paying an agent on the buy side. So there's still no, you can't get rid of us. There's still going to be an agent involved in the transaction unless it's an owner to owner situation.
And then on top of that, if you are looking to buy a house, if you're a buyer in this market and you're looking to buy a property, then you would not have to pay a realtor out of pocket for something unless it's agreed on.
Right.
Well, but here's the stipulation. It depends on who you work with, right? Like, if it depends on if you're working somebody who's reliable and trustworthy or not, right? And that's why I always say, like, if you're looking to purchase something, work with somebody who you can trust and has a reputation, because that's the most important thing. We're talking about, something that could be somebody's most expensive purchase in their lifetime. You want to make sure everything goes right and you're not cutting corners on something like this.
No. So, I mean, look, you get what you pay for. Agents provide a service, basically. So
Exactly.
Either way, you're still going to use an agent. Yes, you could do it by yourself. It's going to be a little bit more complicated. I don't suggest doing so.
Yep.
Maybe a little biased, but when you have the proper guidance, the proper experience, the proper knowledge to give to somebody and add value, then it's only going to benefit them. So there it goes. We're wrapping this episode up.
Yes.
James, where can people reach you?
Reach me on Instagram, Finance by James. Kevin
sold my home on all social media platforms. It's a wrap.
All right. That was the latest episode of Real Estate and Chill Podcast. We will see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to the Real Estate and Chill Podcast with James Chaudhry and Kevin Iglesias. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, share this with your friends, your enemies, your mother-in-law. No, seriously, this podcast is so fucking good. You might want to tell your ex. See you next time.